Welcome to Infidelity Diaries. Explore the secrets and stories of infidelity with us. My name is Maggie Hart, and my life was like a meticulously crafted article. Every paragraph thought out, every fact checked. I was confident that nothing could shake my certainty and professionalism. But one day, a man appeared in the editorial office who turned everything upside down. His name was Thomas Brooks, our new editor. This romance, which began innocently as a simple work contact, turned into a storm of passions and emotions, breaking all my usual boundaries. This is a story about how the sparks that accidentally ignited at the intersection of our paths turned into a fire that engulfed us both. The workday at the Boston Times began as usual. I arrived earlier than everyone else, as was customary. I had time to read the morning news, review my notes, and prepare for the meeting with colleagues. My life was scheduled down to the minute, and I was proud of that. I was a senior correspondent and did not miss a single important detail. Today, however, everything was different. There was an air of anticipation of something new. The reason for this was our new editor, Thomas Brooks. There were various rumors about him. Some said he was strict and uncompromising. Others assured that he was fair and could find an approach to everyone. I didn't know yet which of these categories he belonged to, but I was ready to find out. When Thomas entered the editorial office, his confident gait and piercing gaze immediately attracted everyone's attention. He scanned the room, and it seemed to me that his eyes lingered on me a little longer than on the others. At that moment, I didn't give it much thought, considering it part of his professional assessment. The first meeting went smoothly. Thomas turned out to be competent and demanding, but not rude. He listened to all the proposals, made corrections, and asked questions that made you think. When he addressed me, I felt something inside me tremble. "Maggie, tell me about your latest investigation," he asked, looking straight into my eyes. His voice was soft but authoritative. I started talking, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. His interest was genuine, and it inspired me. He asked questions, took notes, and at some point, I found myself wanting this conversation to go on forever. After the meeting, Thomas approached me. "Maggie, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to discuss your investigation in more detail," he said. We went out into the hallway, and I noticed how my colleagues were glancing at us. It was pleasant to feel the center of attention, but even more, I was captivated by the fact that this attention came from Thomas. "Your investigation is very promising," he began when we stopped by a window overlooking the cityscape. "I want you to delve deeper into this topic. If you need any help, don't hesitate to reach out to me." "Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate your support," I replied, feeling that something more than just a professional interaction was beginning to develop between us. A few days passed, and our meetings became regular. We discussed work, exchanged opinions, and I started to feel drawn to this man. Thomas was not just a professional in his field, but also a person with deep knowledge and an unusual perspective on the world. One evening, when most of the staff had already gone home, we were alone in the editorial office again. I was working on an article when I heard footsteps. Thomas approached my desk and quietly asked, "Do you mind if I join you?" "Of course not," I replied, trying to hide my excitement. We sat side by side, discussing my article, and I felt the tension between us growing. At some point, I turned to him, and our eyes met. His eyes were full of warmth and interest, and I felt a spark ignite inside me. Thomas slowly leaned towards me, and I didn't pull away. His lips touched mine, and at that moment, everything around disappeared. It was the first kiss, full of passion and tenderness, that made my heart beat even faster. We pulled away from each other, and I saw in his eyes the same thing I felt: desire, fear, and excitement. "Maggie, I can't deny it," he said quietly. "There is something between us, and I want to see where it leads." I nodded. understanding that this was the beginning of something new and unknown. We stood on the threshold of a romantic adventure, and I couldn't predict how it would end. But at that moment, I didn't care. I just wanted to be with him. When I returned home that night, emotions overwhelmed me. My husband, John, was already asleep, and I slipped into bed, trying not to wake him. His steady breathing was soothing, but thoughts of Thomas wouldn't leave me. I lay in the darkness, rethinking everything that had happened, unable to believe I had allowed myself to be drawn into this romance. Yet something about Thomas pulled me in, and I knew I couldn't resist. The next day at work, I tried to act as usual. Thomas and I exchanged only brief glances, but I felt his presence every minute. The office bustled with the usual activity, but for me, everything had changed. Each of his looks, every accidental touch, caused excitement. During lunch, Thomas suggested we meet at a nearby cafe. I agreed, feeling my heart begin to race. We sat at a small table, and the conversation smoothly transitioned from professional topics to personal ones. Thomas spoke about his childhood in a small town in Ohio, how he always dreamed of becoming a journalist, and his first steps in his career. I shared my stories too, and a genuine connection formed between us. At some point, he took my hand, looked into my eyes, and said, "Maggie, I can't stop thinking about you. This isn't just a fling. I truly feel something special." His words touched me deeply. I understood that our relationship could bring many problems, but at that moment, I didn't care. I wanted to be with him despite all possible consequences. When we returned to the office, I felt the tension between us only increase. We exchanged furtive glances, and each time it thrilled me. At the end of the day, Thomas suggested meeting after work to continue our conversation in a more private setting. I agreed, although inside, everything screamed that this was the wrong path. We met at a cozy bar in the city center. Thomas chose a quiet corner and we ordered cocktails. The atmosphere was relaxing, and I felt some of the tension ease. We continued our conversation, and I enjoyed every minute spent with him. "Maggie, I want to know everything about you," he said, leaning closer. "Tell me about your dreams. What makes you happy?" I smiled, feeling his interest and attention warm me from within. We talked about many things, and I began to realize that I had never felt such closeness with anyone before, not even with John. Thomas understood me with half a word, and it was both frightening and delightful. When the bar began to close, Thomas offered to walk me home. We walked through the night city, and I enjoyed the moment. Lights shone around us, and I felt as if I were in another world, one free from everyday worries and problems. At the entrance to my building, Thomas stopped, looked into my eyes, and said, "Maggie, I know all this can be complicated, but I can't deny what I feel. Are you ready to move forward?" I nodded, and he kissed me again. This kiss was even more passionate than the first. I felt his hands on my shoulders, and everything inside me ignited. We stood there, oblivious to the passers-by, and I knew I had made a decision that would change my life. When I entered the apartment, John was asleep again. I felt guilty, but I couldn't deny that my feelings for Thomas were too strong to ignore. I knew we faced a difficult path ahead, but I was ready to accept all challenges for the chance to be with the man who made me feel alive. I had never felt so conflicted. On one hand, my life with my husband, Eric, continued as usual. We had been married for 8 years, and our relationship had become stable and predictable, but devoid of the passion I now felt with Thomas. On the other hand, my heart lived in anticipation of each upcoming evening with the new editor. One evening, after a busy day at the office, I came home to find Eric packing his things. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to hide my surprise. "I've been sent on a business trip," he replied without looking up. "It's an important matter, and I can't refuse. I'll be gone for a week." My heart skipped a beat. This was the perfect chance to spend time with Thomas outside of the office. But I tried not to show my excitement. "When are you leaving?" I asked, trying to sound as neutral as possible. Tomorrow morning, I'll be in New York. Investor meetings, Eric explained, finally meeting my gaze. I'll be back next Saturday. I nodded, feeling anticipation growing inside me. This was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. The next morning was a whirlwind of packing. I helped Eric with his things, trying to be the caring wife, but my thoughts were far away. I was thinking about Thomas and how I could spend this time with him. When Eric finally left, I felt relief and anticipation. I quickly messaged Thomas. Eric has gone on a business trip for a week. Can you come over tonight? I wrote, my heart racing with excitement. The response came almost immediately. Of course, I'll be there at 7. I spent the whole day working, but my thoughts kept returning to the upcoming evening. I felt anticipation building inside me. When the workday ended, I hurried home to prepare. I wanted the evening to be special. I cooked dinner, lit candles, and chose my favorite dress. I wanted everything to be perfect. At 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang, and I felt my heart beat faster. I opened the door and saw Thomas. He looked stunning in his sharp suit, and his eyes glowed with warmth and passion. Hi, Maggie, he said, stepping inside. You look beautiful. Thank you, Thomas. Come in, I replied, inviting him into the living room. We sat at the table, and the evening began with light conversation. Thomas talked about his plans for the coming months, sharing ideas for new projects. I listened attentively, enjoying his voice and presence. Maggie, I want you to know, I really value the time we spend together, Thomas said, leaning closer to me. You make my life brighter. I smiled, feeling my heart warm from his words. We finished dinner and moved to the couch, where we continued our conversation. Thomas, tell me about your family, I asked, wanting to know more about the man who had touched my feelings so deeply. He sighed, his eyes darkening for a moment. I don't have any close relatives, he began. My parents died in a car accident when I was a teenager. It was a tough time, but I learned to cope. Life taught me to be strong and independent. I felt his pain transfer to me, and I took his hand. Thomas, you're not alone, I said quietly. I'm here for you. He looked at me gratefully, and I saw warmth and appreciation in his eyes. Thank you, Maggie. You're very important to me, he whispered, leaning closer. Our lips met in a tender kiss that gradually became more passionate. His arms wrapped around me, and I felt my body respond to his touch. In that moment, I realized I was ready to take risks for these feelings. We pulled away, and Thomas looked at me with tenderness and passion. Maggie, I want to be with you, no matter what, he said. And I with you, Thomas, I replied, feeling our souls grow closer. Time flew by, and when we finally decided it was time to say goodbye, I felt that something had changed in our lives. This evening left a shadow of hope for a bright future in my heart. The next day, I came to work feeling different. Colleagues noticed my good mood, but I tried not to draw too much attention to myself. Thomas was in the office too, and we exchanged only brief, understanding glances. We continued meeting in the evenings, being careful not to reveal our romance. Each meeting became a little celebration for us, a moment when we could be ourselves and enjoy each other's company. However, like any hidden feeling, ours began to attract attention. I noticed how some colleagues looked at us with interest and even suspicion. I realized that we wouldn't be able to hide our relationship for long, and it started to worry me. One evening, when Thomas and I were alone in the office again, he suggested, Maggie, maybe we should spend some time together at your place. That way, we can avoid prying eyes and just enjoy each other's company. I nodded, feeling my heart start to beat faster. Yes, that's a good idea. When? How about Friday? He suggested, and I agreed, looking forward to that evening. When Friday finally came, I felt excited and nervous. I tried not to show my feelings at work, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. In the evening, I prepared the house for Thomas's arrival, cooked dinner, lit candles, and chose my best dress. At 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang, and I felt my heart beat faster. I opened the door and saw Thomas. He looked stunning in his sharp suit, and his eyes glowed with warmth and passion. "Hi, Maggie," he said, stepping inside. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, Thomas." "Come in," I replied, inviting him into the living room. We sat at the table, and the evening began with light conversation. Thomas talked about his plans for the coming months, sharing ideas for new projects. I listened attentively, enjoying his voice and presence. "Maggie, I want you to know, I really value the time we spend together," Thomas said, leaning closer to me. "You make my life brighter." I smiled, feeling my heart warm from his words. We finished dinner and moved to the couch, where we continued our conversation. "Thomas, tell me about your family," I asked, wanting to know more about the man who had touched my feelings so deeply. He sighed, his eyes darkening for a moment. "I don't have any close relatives," he began. "My parents died in a car accident when I was a teenager. It was a tough time, but I learned to cope. Life taught me to be strong and independent." I felt his pain transfer to me, and I took his hand. "Thomas, you're not alone," I said quietly. "I'm here for you." He looked at me gratefully, and I saw warmth and appreciation in his eyes. "Thank you, Maggie. You're very important to me," he whispered, leaning closer. Our lips met in a tender kiss that gradually became more passionate. His arms wrapped around me, and I felt my body respond to his touch. Thomas began to slowly stroke my back, his hands warm and confident. He held me tighter, and I felt his breathing grow more irregular. Our kisses deepened, becoming more fervent, and I felt a wave of passion engulf us both. "Maggie," he whispered, pulling away for a moment. "I want you." "I want you too, Thomas," I replied, feeling my desire intensify with each passing second. He gently took my hand and led me to the bedroom. We moved slowly, as if savoring every moment of this experience. Once in the bedroom, Thomas stopped and looked at me, his eyes blazing with passion and love. "You're so beautiful," he said, and I felt my heart melt at his words. He slowly began to unzip my dress, and I felt his hands brush against my skin. His touch was gentle but sure, and every time he touched me, I felt a wave of warmth spread throughout my body. When the dress fell to the floor, Thomas embraced me and began kissing my neck, his lips hot and eager. I closed my eyes, relishing every touch. Thomas slowly guided me to the bed and laid me down on the soft sheets. He looked at me with such passion that I felt my body melt under his gaze. He began to undress, and I couldn't take my eyes off his strong, muscular body. When he was beside me again, his lips found mine, and I felt his body press against mine. His hands glided over my skin, and I felt every cell of my body respond to his touch. We moved in sync, as if our bodies were made for each other. Thomas began kissing me lower and lower, his lips soft and warm. I moaned with pleasure, feeling waves of ecstasy wash over me. He was attentive to my every breath, every movement. His touch was gentle, yet insistent, and I felt my body respond to his caresses. When he returned to my lips, I hugged him and pulled him closer. Our bodies melded into one, and I felt a wave of passion overwhelm me. We moved together, our breaths merging, and I felt every second of this moment become unforgettable. Thomas looked at me with such love and tenderness that I felt my heart melt. We continued to move together, our bodies becoming one, and I felt waves of pleasure envelop me. It was a night full of passion and love, a night I would never forget. When we finally stopped, I lay beside Thomas, feeling his arms around me. We looked at each other, and I saw in his eyes the reflection of my feelings. This was a night that changed everything, a night that brought us closer than ever. "Maggie, I'll never forget this night," Thomas said quietly, his voice full of tenderness. "Neither will I, Thomas," I replied, feeling my heart fill with love and happiness. We lay together, holding each other, and I felt that this moment would forever remain in my memory. We were together, and that was what mattered most. A night full of passion had become the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, and I knew there were many more wonderful moments ahead of us. The night with Thomas left an indelible mark on my soul. Every touch, every kiss, every moment spent with him filled me with sensations I hadn't experienced in a long time. However, the morning brought a shadow of doubt and anxiety. I lay beside Thomas, listening to his steady breathing, and pondered what to do next. When he woke up and held me, I felt the warmth and security he provided, but deep inside, doubts were growing. I had a husband, and despite our relationship having long become routine and lifeless, I still felt a responsibility toward him. Thomas sensed my unease and looked at me with a question in his eyes. "What are you thinking about, Maggie?" he asked, gently stroking my hand. "I'm thinking about what we should do next," I replied, meeting his gaze. "I have a husband, and I can't just leave him." Thomas sighed, his face turning serious. "Maggie, I understand your situation, but I can't continue living in the shadows. I want to be with you, and I want us to be together openly." I nodded, feeling my doubts intensify. "Thomas, I want to be with you too, but I need to sort out my feelings and make a decision that will be right for all of us." The entire next day I spent in contemplation. I returned home, trying to act as usual, but thoughts of Thomas wouldn't leave me. I recalled how I felt with him and realized I couldn't continue deceiving myself and Eric. When Eric returned from his business trip, I tried to act normal, but I felt that something had changed. I watched him, listened to his stories about the trip, and tried to understand what I truly felt. Our life together was predictable and calm, but I didn't feel what I experienced with Thomas. One evening, sitting on the couch with Eric, I realized I had to make a decision. I couldn't live in duality and deceit any longer. "Eric, we need to talk," I said, trying to stay calm. "What's going on, Maggie?" he asked, turning to me. "I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I've come to the conclusion that our relationship no longer brings us happiness. I don't want to continue living a lie. I've met someone else, and I realized that my feelings for you have changed." Eric looked at me with surprise and pain. "Maggie, I didn't expect this. Are you sure this is the right decision?" "Yes, Eric. I understand that it's hard, but I can't continue living a lie. I want to be honest with you and with myself," I replied, feeling tears well up in my eyes. Eric sighed and lowered his head. "I understand, Maggie. It hurts, but I respect your decision. I want you to be happy," he said, and I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. That night, I contacted Thomas and told him about my decision. He was happy and grateful for my honesty. "Maggie, I promise I'll do everything to make you happy," he said, his voice full of warmth and confidence. When we met the next day, I felt liberated and ready for a new life. Thomas hugged me, and I knew I had made the right choice. We stood on the threshold of a new chapter, full of love, passion, and hope for the future. Our relationship grew even stronger, and we began to make plans for our future together. I knew there would be trials and difficulties ahead, but I was ready to move forward with Thomas. We were together, and that was what mattered most. Time passed, and our love only grew stronger. We supported each other in all our endeavors, shared dreams, and made plans for the future. I felt that I had finally found my happiness and was grateful for every moment spent with Thomas. Several months later, we decided to move in together. It was another significant decision in our lives, and I knew that together we could handle any challenges. Thomas became not only my partner, but also my best friend, and I was confident that our love would withstand any tests. Several months had passed since I made the decision to stay with Thomas. Our lives had changed dramatically, but I had never felt more confident in my choice. We moved into a new apartment in the heart of Boston, and each day became a new adventure for us. Thomas was not only my lover, but also a true partner in all aspects of life. We supported each other at work, shared dreams, and made plans for the future. I felt that I had finally found my happiness. One evening, as we were having dinner at home, Thomas suddenly raised his glass and looked at me with love. "Maggie," he began, "these past few months have been the happiest of my life. I can't imagine my life without you. You are my source of inspiration and joy." I felt my heart fill with warmth. "Thomas, I feel the same. You have made my life brighter and happier. I'm grateful for every day we spend together." We clinked glasses, and I felt our hearts beat in unison. At that moment, I realized that everything we had gone through had led us to this beautiful moment. Thomas stood up from the table and approached me, taking my hand. "Maggie, I have a surprise for you," he said, smiling. "Close your eyes." I obediently closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of excitement and curiosity. Thomas led me to another room, and I heard him take something out. "You can open your eyes now," he said. When I opened my eyes, I saw a small box adorned with a ribbon. Thomas knelt down and handed it to me. "Maggie, you've changed my life, and I want to spend every remaining day with you. Will you marry me?" I was stunned and moved to tears. Inside the box was a ring, sparkling in the lamplight. My hands trembled as I took it. "Yes, Thomas," I replied, barely holding back tears of happiness. "I will!" He slipped the ring onto my finger and hugged me, and I felt his heart beating as strongly as mine. We stood there, embracing, savoring the moment. It was the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, filled with love and hope. Our wedding was modest, but filled with love and warmth. We invited only our closest friends and colleagues who had supported us throughout this journey. Thomas and I exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through all the trials that might come our way. After the wedding, we went on our honeymoon, choosing a quiet coastal location where we could enjoy each other's company without prying eyes. Each day was filled with joy and happiness, and I felt our bond grow even stronger. Returning home, we eagerly resumed our work, continuing to support and inspire each other. Our careers flourished, and we both felt that together, we could achieve any heights. Years passed, and our life was full of happy moments and accomplishments. We traveled, discovering new places and cultures, spent time with friends and family, and cherished every moment we spent together. Our home was filled with laughter and love, and I felt that I had finally found my place in the world. Thomas and I continued to work together, creating successful projects and supporting each other during tough times. We were not only spouses, but also best friends who could share any thoughts and dreams. Looking back, I realized that all the trials and hardships we had gone through had made us stronger and brought us closer together. I was grateful for every moment, every tear, and every laugh that had led us to this happiness. Now, when I looked at Thomas, I saw in his eyes the reflection of my love and confidence in our future. We knew that there were many more wonderful moments and achievements ahead, and we were ready to move forward together, hand in hand. This was a story of love and overcoming obstacles, of finding happiness and discovering it in the most unexpected places. Thomas and I knew that our love would always support us, and we were ready to face the future with confidence and joy.